They met on an ordinary Thursday night at a local community center in Cedar Grove, Ohio. Judith Hayes was there for bingo, reluctantly dragged out her house by a neighbor who claimed she was spending too much time alone. At 61, Judith had become a creature of solitude, a retired librarian, a widow of nearly a decade, and a quiet woman with a love for tea, roses, and old poetry. She had made peace with the idea that love had long since exited her life. Marvin Bell wasn't looking for romance either. At 63, he was a man of routine. Mornings started with black coffee and newsprint, followed by long walks that favored his injured knee from the service. A widower as well, Marvin had lost his wife to cancer years ago. He kept his grief buried under a hardened exterior, the kind only age and war can carve into a man. Fate, however, has its own sense of humor. Marvin was at the community center by mistake, thinking he was early for a veterans poker game. Instead, he found a room full of chatter, checkerboard tables, and a woman with silver curls and the saddest eyes he'd ever seen. Judith looked up from her bingo card and caught him staring. He smiled. She didn't. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, something began to shift. Marvin kept showing up on bingo night, on time, this time, and always managed to sit near Judith. Their conversation started small. The weather, the best diner in town, her roses, his dog. They were both cautious, almost embarrassed by the spark beginning to catch flame between them. Neither had expected, nor prepared, for the possibility of falling in love again. Sunday brunches followed, then Wednesday strolls. She introduced him to peppermint tea and jazz music. He taught her how to fish, though she found it terribly boring. They danced in her living room to Nat King Cole records, giggling like teenagers who had sneaked out of house. Judith hadn't felt that alive in years. And Marvin, after a long stretch of lonely dinners and silent nights, began to feel something like joy again. By the 6th month, Marvin asked her to marry him. He didn't make a big production out of it. No ring hidden in cake or fancy restaurant with candlelight. Just him, standing in her backyard with a single red rose, fumbling through the words and looking her straight in the eye. "I know we're older, and I know this might not make sense to anyone else," he said. "But I don't want to spend another year, not even another day, without calling you my wife." Judith said yes before he could finish the sentence. They planned a simple ceremony in the spring. Close friends, a few neighbors, their adult children. No frills, no drama, just love. But love, they soon discovered, doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it rips them apart. It started with silence. Judith sent an invitation to her only son, Brandon, with a handwritten note inside. He didn't respond. When she called to follow up, the line rang 5 times before going to voicemail. Marvin had a similar experience with his daughter, Elise. Her text became shorter. Her voice turned clipped and cold when he brought up Judith's name. At first, he brushed it off as surprise, maybe even mild disapproval. After all, it's not every day your 63-year-old father tells you he's getting remarried. But days turned into weeks, and silence turned into distance. Brandon finally replied. One line, no greeting, no emotion. "This is a mistake." Judith reread those words a dozen times. She tried not to cry. She told herself he was just being protective, just confused. She and Marvin weren't doing anything wrong. They were just two people, two good people, who had found comfort in one another. But Brandon didn't see it that way. Neither did Elise. She canceled dinner plans, avoided phone calls, and then one day mailed Marvin a letter, typed formal and cold, asking him to reconsider rushing into this. She questioned Judith's motives. She hinted at concerns about finances and inheritance. The word gold digger wasn't used, but it was implied between every sentence. Judith was devastated. Marvin was furious. They tried to reason. They offered to meet, to talk it out, to assure their kids that this wasn't about replacing anyone, or about money, or about rewriting history. It was about healing, finally, but healing can't happen when wounds are forced open. Brandon refused every invitation. Judith's birthday came and went without so much as a phone call. Elise began distancing herself from her father's life entirely, quietly telling family friends that she feared he was being manipulated. It hurt, deeply, but Judith and Marvin had already made their decision. They would marry, with or without their children's blessing. They chose to focus on the good, the morning coffee shared on the porch, the quiet nights reading beside each other, the soft comfort of being understood, without explanation. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. It was theirs. They ordered simple gold bands. Judith picked wildflowers from her garden to make her own bouquet. Marvin pressed his old army uniform, not for formality, but because he knew how much Judith loved the way he looked in it. They didn't talk much about the absences they knew they'd feel that day, the 2 empty chairs where their children should have sat. They didn't need to, because sometimes silence speaks louder than screams. And sometimes that silence is the beginning of something far darker than anyone could imagine. The wedding was small, intimate, the kind of gathering where everyone knew each other by first name and brought casseroles to share. Judith wore a pale blue dress. Marvin wore his press suit and that gentle smile she loved so much. They exchanged vows in Judith's backyard beneath a trellis wrapped in wildflowers she had planted herself. It should have been a perfect day. But perfection doesn't leave shadows on chairs that were meant to be filled. Brandon didn't show. Neither did Elise. There were no phone calls, no texts, no explanations, only silence, so loud Judith could feel in her chest as she said, "I do." Marvin's hand trembled slightly when he placed the ring on her finger, but not from nerves. He was holding something back. Disappointment, hurt, and a rising sense of something he couldn't quite name yet. After the ceremony, guests congratulated them with genuine smiles and warm hugs. Everyone agreed it was sweet, heartwarming even, to see 2 people find love again so late in life. But behind the well wishes, Judith couldn't shake the feeling that judgment lingered in the air. A few polite smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. A neighbor mentioned Elise had made her opinion known at church, that she thought Judith was rushing Marvin, that it all seemed too convenient. That word again, convenient, as if love had a schedule. Back at home, things weren't better. 2 days after the wedding, a certified letter arrived. Elise had retained a lawyer. Nothing official, just a concerned inquiry into Marvin's finances. Judith wasn't mentioned by name, but the implication was clear. His daughter believed he was being exploited. Judith didn't say anything at first. She left the letter on the kitchen counter, face down. Marvin found it an hour later and read it in silence. Then he folded it up and threw it in the trash. They didn't talk about it that night. The next morning, Judith called Brandon again, straight to voicemail. She tried texting, keeping it light. "I hope you're doing okay. We missed you at the wedding. I love you." No response. Marvin suggested letting things breathe. "They just need time," he said. "They'll come around." But a week later, he got a phone call from Elise. And it didn't sound like coming around at all. It sounded like a warning. She accused Judith of being manipulative, said Marvin had been different since meeting her, more distant, less focused. Elise even claimed Judith was trying to isolate him from his own family. Marvin tried to defend his wife, but Elise wouldn't hear it. By the end of the call, Marvin's hands were shaking. Judith made him tea, sat next to him, and whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't say anything. He just stared at the wall for a long time. The silence between them started creeping in at night. Judith would wake up at 2 a.m. and find Marvin sitting in the living room, staring out the window. When she asked what was wrong, he always gave the same answer, "Just thinking." But she knew better. Something was festering, not just in their children, but now, between them. A few days later, Brandon sent an email, not to Judith, to one of her oldest friends, Susan, who had attended the wedding. In it, he laid out his suspicions. He said Judith had always been calculating, that she never really grieved his father, that she latched onto Marvin like a lifeline because she couldn't stand being alone. Susan forwarded the message to Judith. Reading it felt like swallowing glass. She didn't tell Marvin. She just cried, quietly, in the bathroom with the door locked. It wasn't just rejection anymore. It was character assassination. From their own blood. They tried again one last time, to fix things. Marvin invited Elise over for coffee. No pressure, just a chance to talk. She didn't come. Instead, she sent a letter demanding a financial power of attorney be established to protect her father's assets. Judith called Brandon and left one final voicemail. Her voice was trembling, almost pleading. "I don't know what I did to make you hate me, but I love Marvin, and I love you. I never wanted to come between anyone. Please, can we talk? Before things get worse." That was the last message she ever sent him. The next morning, someone had spray painted the word liar on Judith's mailbox. She called the police, but there were no cameras, no witnesses. Nothing they could do. Marvin scrubbed the paint off himself, quietly, without saying a word. That night, he finally admitted what they had both been thinking. "This is turning into something else, Judith. This isn't just hurt feelings anymore. It's hate." Judith nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. They had walked into this marriage with open hearts, believing love could conquer loneliness. But they hadn't prepared for bitterness it would uncover. They hadn't expected that the very people they raised, loved, and nurtured would see their happiness as a threat. Whatever this was, it wasn't just disapproval anymore. It was war, and it was only beginning. Marvin had always believed in loyalty, especially to family. For years, he carried the weight of fatherhood like armor. Sacrifices, sleepless nights, tuition payments, and long hours at the warehouse job, all of it for Elise. He remembered teaching her how to ride a bike, running beside her until she found her balance. He remembered staying up all night with her when she had the flu in 8th grade, and how tightly she clung to his hand during her mother's funeral. He never imagined that same hand would someday be the one she would slap away. Judith felt it too. Her son, Brandon, hadn't just rejected her marriage. He rejected her entirely. He was her only child. She'd raise him on her own after his father died, read him bedtime stories, packed his lunches, worked late shifts just to keep the lights on. All those years of devotion, and now she was a villain in his story. Every attempt to bridge the gap was met with resistance. The silence from Brandon had curdled into disdain. When he finally responded to one of Judith's emails, his words felt like an indictment. You've chosen him, not me, so don't act surprised when I make the same choice. She read that line over and over until it blurred. She hadn't chosen sides. At least, she hadn't meant to. But maybe without realizing it, she had. She chose love. And in doing so, she lost blood. The emotional weight settled into their home like fog. Thick, cold, unrelenting. Judith and Marvin tiptoed around conversations that might reopen wounds. Marvin stopped mentioning Elise. Judith stopped trying to reach Brandon. Their marriage, once full of laughter, jazz music, and afternoon tea, had begun to feel like a bunker, a place where love existed not in freedom, but in defense. Then came the rumors. One of Judith's church friends, Evelyn, pulled her aside after Sunday service. She looked hesitant, uncomfortable. I thought you should know. Elise has been telling people Marvin's sick, that he's not thinking clearly, that you're influencing him. Judith's mouth went dry. What do you mean sick? Something about memory loss, maybe dementia. She's saying you rushed the wedding to get legal control before it got worse. It was a lie, a cruel one, but explained so much. Why neighbors had started pulling away, why Marvin's doctor called about a surprise family request to schedule neurological testing. Elise was trying to build a case. Judith told Marvin, expecting anger, but what she saw instead was something worse. Guilt. I should have seen this coming, he said quietly. She's always been possessive, even with her mother. I just never thought she'd turn on me like this. He agreed to the tests, not because he needed them, but because he wanted proof. Cold, medical proof that he was of sound mind, that he hadn't lost control of his faculties, that the only thing he'd lost was the respect of his daughter. The results came back clear. No cognitive decline, no signs of early dementia, just a man trying to live the remainder of his life with some damn peace. But peace had already been shattered. One afternoon, Marvin went to check the mail and found a typed document folded neatly into a plain envelope. It was a formal request, on behalf of Elise, to petition for guardianship. She claimed he was being coerced by Judith, and that she had reason to believe his physical and financial well-being were at risk. He sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, just staring at the paper. Judith didn't speak. She just placed a hand on his shoulder and waited. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. She thinks I'm weak, he said, that I can't think for myself. No, Judith whispered. She knows you can. That's what scares her. Marvin folded the letter in half and placed it in a drawer. That drawer would soon be filled with more. Legal notices, bank inquiries, letters from Elise's lawyer, each one colder than the last. Judith, meanwhile, had become a stranger to her own son. When Brandon's wife, Lacey, had a baby, a little girl named Grace, Judith was informed. She only found out through a mutual friend's Facebook post. The photo showed Brandon cradling the newborn, smiling proudly. There was no mention of Judith. No call. No visit. She stared at that photo for an hour. Not because of the baby, she could barely even look at her, but because of the look on Brandon's face. The joy, the peace, the ease with which he erased his mother from the moment. It broke something in her. She and Marvin sat on the porch that evening. A light rain tapped against the tin roof above them. They didn't speak at first, just sat side by side, holding hands. were being punished, Judith finally said. Marvin turned toward her. For what? For falling in love. He exhaled slowly, like the air had been waiting to leave his lungs for days. I'd do it all again. She looked at him, eyes glassy. Even if it means losing them? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Because he'd spent years being needed, but never truly seen. Years being depended on, but never chosen for who he was. And Judith, despite the chaos, had chosen him. But love, they were learning, demands sacrifice. It demands choices no parent ever wants to make. And in choosing each other, they had become the villains in their children's eyes. That realization didn't bring relief. Only sadness. The kind of sadness that doesn't make a sound, but settles into your bones and stays there. Still, they held on to each other. Not out of desperation, but defiance. A quiet protest against the notion that love had an expiration date, that happiness belonged only to the young, or that family was entitled to obedience no matter how cruel it became. But the deeper they clung to one another, the more vicious the backlash became. And neither of them saw what was coming next. Not the betrayal, not the violence, not the moment everything would turn irreversible. The air in the house began to shift. At first, it was subtle. Judith noticed drawers left open that she was sure she closed. Mail rearranged. A faint scent of cologne neither she nor Marvin wore. Things didn't feel right. One evening, she came home from the store to find the back door ajar. Marvin was upstairs napping. Nothing appeared missing, but something was off. It was a kind of unease that doesn't come from paranoia, but from instinct, the kind you don't need proof to believe. Judith started locking every door twice. They assumed Elise and Brandon's resentment had reached its peak, that the worst they could do was isolate, accuse, or gossip. But what neither Marvin nor Judith understood, at least not yet, was that this wasn't just family tension anymore. It had evolved into something far darker. A week later, Marvin got a call from his bank. An unusual request had been flagged. Someone tried to transfer a substantial sum out of his account using an outdated password and a copy of his old signature. The teller paused the transaction, sensing something suspicious. The account was frozen, temporarily safe, but the violation was clear. Judith's stomach twisted. That same day, she noticed Marvin's prescription bottle in the cabinet, open, but something was wrong. The pills inside looked different. She wasn't a pharmacist, but she knew his medication. These weren't them. She rushed it to the pharmacy. The technician confirmed it. Someone had swapped them out. They called the police, filed a report, but without proof of who did it and no forced entry, there was little anyone could do. Marvin changed the locks the next day. Still, the unease didn't lift. Judith started sleeping with a light on. Marvin kept a small bat near the door. They were no longer living. They were bracing. Then came the call that would unravel everything. A social worker contacted Marvin about a report filed on his behalf. An anonymous tip claimed that Judith was emotionally abusing him, limiting his access to finances, and forcing him to isolate from loved ones. The case had already been escalated to Adult Protective Services. Marvin was stunned. They think I'm a hostage in my own home. Judith sat there, speechless. Her mouth open, but nothing came out. She knew who did it. Not officially, but in her heart. Brandon. The pattern was becoming clear. The financial sabotage, the identity theft, the drug tampering, and now a legal attempt to paint Judith as dangerous. This wasn't just retaliation. It was a coordinated effort to dismantle their lives from the inside out. The next day, they hired a lawyer, someone neutral, someone smart, someone who believed them. He advised them to document everything: dates, calls, letters, bottles, photos, bank statements. Build a paper trail. Because this was no longer about family. This was about survival. But it was already too late. That weekend, someone broke in. It was a Saturday night. Marvin and Judith had gone out to dinner, something they hadn't done in months. Just 2 hours of pretending the world hadn't turned on them. When they returned, the front door was cracked open. Inside, the living room had been torn apart. Cabinets emptied, drawers pulled out, paper scattered. Their wedding album ripped in half. Judith's late husband's urn shattered. Ashes spilled across the carpet. It was personal. It was deliberate. They called the police again. This time, they took it seriously. The officer noticed something strange. A drawer in Marvin's study was pried open with a screwdriver. Inside had been a lockbox containing his will, marriage certificate, and other sensitive documents. It was missing. Whoever did this didn't want valuables. They wanted control. A few days later, Elise's lawyer sent a notice of intent to challenge Marvin's legal capacity. She was petitioning for full conservatorship, citing declining mental health, unexplained financial activity, and concerns from multiple family members. Judith almost laughed. It was textbook manipulation. But Marvin didn't laugh. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his shoulders low, his breath shallow. "She wants me powerless," he whispered. Judith kneeled beside him. "She wants you gone." Because as long as Marvin could speak for himself, as long as he had a voice, a choice, Elise couldn't win. So the plan had changed. It wasn't about family anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about erasure. Make Marvin appear unstable. Paint Judith as abusive. Strip them of credibility, independence, and resources. And when no one's looking, seize everything. A slow, methodical coup disguised as concern. Judith's lawyer warned them. It's not just a court battle anymore. They're setting you up for a fall. Marvin tightened his grip on Judith's hand. They won't win. But Judith knew. Love had kept them strong. But it might not be enough. Because what they were up against wasn't just anger. It was a sinister plan already in motion. And it was only gathering speed. The wind that night carried a strange kind of silence. Judith couldn't sleep. Not because of the rain tapping on the windows. Not even because of the court date looming ahead. But because something inside her felt unsettled. Marvin was already in bed, his breathing deep and steady. She looked at him for a moment longer than usual, studied the lines on his face, the silver in his beard, the man she had chosen to love, at the cost of everything else. She never expected to feel this alone while lying beside someone. Then came the sound. Glass. Breaking. Downstairs. She froze. For a second, she told herself it might have been a branch. Or the wind, or her imagination. But then came footsteps. Real, heavy, intentional. She moved quickly, shook Marvin awake. He stirred, confused but alert. The fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. He grabbed the bat by the dresser. Judith reached for her phone. No service. No dial tone on the landline either. They were being cut off, again. But this time, it wasn't a break-in for documents or scare tactics. This wasn't a message. This was a mission. They crept out of the bedroom together, every creak in the floorboards echoing like thunder in the hallway. Judith's heart thudded so loud, she swore it would give them away. Then they saw the silhouette, a figure, standing at the bottom of the stairs, armed. Marvin stepped forward. "Elise," he called out. No answer, just the sound of breath, shaky, uneven, and then confirmation. "Dad." Her voice was colder than Judith had ever heard it. "You need help," Elise said. "You don't see what she's done to you." Judith's voice trembled. "Elise, please, put down." "You took him from me," Elise snapped. "You poisoned his mind. My father is gone because of you." "I'm right here," Marvin said. "You think I don't have a mind of my own?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." The gun in her hand trembled. Judith could see it now. Fully. Real. Loaded. Not a bluff. Behind her, a second shadow moved. Brandon. Judith's blood ran cold. He was holding something too. Duct tape. Rope. They had come prepared. Marvin stood his ground. "You're going to regret this. You're not thinking straight." "You don't understand," Elise whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I lost Mom. And now, I'm losing you too." "You didn't lose me," Marvin said softly. "You just couldn't accept who I became." But logic didn't matter now. Because this wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about pain, control, rage that had fermented too long. Brandon lunged first, tried to grab Marvin. The two men struggled at the base of the stairs. Judith screamed, rushing down, but Elise blocked her path with the gun. "Back off." Elise shouted, but something in her wavered. This wasn't who she was. Or at least, not who she used to be. Brandon shoved Marvin hard. He hit the floor, gasping, the bat rolling out of reach. Judith charged. No thought, just instinct. She slammed into Brandon, her fists flailing. That's when it happened. The shot, one deafening crack, that split the house open. Judith turned. Marvin was on the ground. Still, blood spreading beneath him. Her scream shattered the silence. Elise dropped the gun. Shock etched into her face. She hadn't meant to. She hadn't intended. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Brandon froze, eyes wide. "We need to go." Judith dropped to Marvin's side, pressing her hands over the wound. "Stay with me. Please, stay with me." But Marvin was fading. He looked up at her, eyes soft, peaceful. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She shook her head, sobbing. No, don't say that. You didn't do anything wrong. I chose love," he said. And then nothing. No more words. No more breath. Just silence. Elise fell to her knees, staring at her father's body. The man she had claimed to be saving. The man she had just destroyed. Judith didn't look at her. Couldn't. She stared at the man who had loved her until his last moment. The man whose only crime was trying to be happy. And now he was gone. Forever. The sirens came too late. Neighbors had heard the shot. Police stormed the house, found Judith cradling Marvin, soaked in blood. Elise and Brandon were arrested on the spot, charged with manslaughter, home invasion, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy. The prosecution pushed for second-degree murder. The courtroom was packed with reporters, church members, neighbors who once smiled at them on their porch. During the trial, Elise sobbed through her statement, claimed it was an accident, claimed she only wanted to scare Judith, that she never thought it would end like this. But the planning said otherwise. The duct tape, the rope, the fake prescriptions, the bank attempts, the court petitions. This wasn't heat of the moment. This was a Cold War turned hot. Judith sat through every hearing, wearing Marvin's wedding ring around her neck. She never spoke to Elise or Brandon again. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. They were sentenced. 10 years for Brandon, 15 for Elise. But justice couldn't touch the grief. After the sentencing, Judith returned home alone, to the same porch where she and Marvin used to drink tea, to the house they made a home, even while under siege. She kept everything as it was. His chair, his mug, his slippers by the door. Some nights, she sat outside and imagined him sitting next to her again, humming quietly, his hand resting on hers. Love had come late, but it had come, and though it ended in tragedy, Judith never once regretted choosing it, because real love, no matter how brief, was worth more than a lifetime of fear.